As you know, Joe is very, very persuasive. When he read my book and complimented me, it's very sweet, and he asked me to come out here. And I said, but Joe, May 4th is my birthday. And he said, what are you, 10 years old? And I said, thank you. And he said, look, just come out, pose a provocative question, show your book, get some audience input, and, do me that favor. I said, okay, so what's the provocative question? Is the FDA too big to challenge? And the answer is a resounding no. And Joe, thank you. Okay. So, we define what we mean by challenge, right? So, do we challenge on a per product basis? Absolutely. But do we do the more daring thing of challenging on the broad philosophical basis, which our trade organizations are not doing, nobody's really doing effectively in my view. And that's what I've done now. I've started an institute. I'm part of a think tank where I'm a visiting scholar with economists, and I've written some papers we'll get into in a little while. So let's talk about challenge. Everyone remember Sedasis? J&J, a device to monitor anesthesia propofol so that you wouldn't need an anesthesiologist. This is a great product. J&J and their restructuring has stopped promoting it, however. But if you look at the path, it was arduous, right? They filed a PMA. They had a beautiful panel, 8-2 on the merits, 9-1, that nurses and nurse practitioners can use this without an anesthesiologist being in the room. FDA issues a non-approvable letter. J&J filed a petition for supervisory review, which is a very formal way of challenging. They forced the agency to give them a non-approval letter so that they could then file for an appeal. Appeal, that means dispute resolution. That's big stuff. And the FDA granted that they would do the appeal, and then there was clearly discussions between the company and FDA, and J&J retracted the appeal, and a year later they got it approved. Okay, so J&J was quite successful in challenging the FDA. Now, but that's J&J. The prior one that went this route is Cardima, right? Cardima, and they didn't do so well, right? So in 2007 was the last time they lost. They went all the way to dispute resolution. They lost 0-5, and the company went bankrupt. All right. So is the FDA too big for small companies to challenge? Right? J&J can challenge the FDA, especially if you have the goods. And I think that's one of my main messages. If the quality of what you have is solid, I think you absolutely have to challenge the FDA. Often big companies don't challenge the FDA, as you know, because they have 9 other products before them and they don't want to risk it. But let's take a look at some of these other companies, right? Cardima, not so good. The 23andMe didn't put up much of a challenge. Should they have? I actually think they should have. Theranos, no. I don't think they should be challenging the FDA, right? You guys talked about that yesterday. Sprout Pharma challenged them and got the female Viagra approved, and a lot of political pressure on that. Epigenomics, we're going to talk about that later. They also challenged the FDA in a formal way, and they won. We'll get into it. And Sarepta Therapeutics, I don't know if anyone's following the Duchenne muscular dystrophy drug. I know it's a drug, but that's very interesting. I've written a couple of editorials that'll come out in the next couple of days on that. So definitely, I believe when you have the goods, right, when your product is unassailable, the problem is every program has warts on it, right? Every program has a few warts. So it's really a judgment call. But I definitely think on a product basis, we have to challenge the FDA. But I really want to get into on the more important, I think, the philosophical, ideological challenging the FDA, because I think it'll make the product challenges less frequent if we can solve the ideological issues. So yes, I've written this book. I've gotten 3 products approved, a drug for bladder cancer. I ran a few companies, drug, medical device, and a biologic approved for prostate cancer, and a device. This book is about MelaFind, a PMA device. I write a lot. I wrote this book. I have a second book coming. I write a lot of editorials, and I teach cancer biology and a few other things. Okay, so there's a book review in the Wall Street Journal, and the reviewer posed the question at the end. He said, considering all that he's been through, he still believes in a strong FDA. and it can be fixed with just a few tweaks, he's wrong. So notwithstanding, what Joe said, I am a moderate in this. I mean, there's people at the FDA I have tremendous respect for. I have respect for the fact that they do most of the things that I don't think are appropriate out of fear. So I am moderate. I don't think it should be blown up, but I do think that we need fundamental change. So we'll talk later. Do you think I'm wrong? And can we challenge it? Okay. So this is it's the stock chart of Mela and also the time and events. And I can give a whole presentation just on this. I'm not going to, but I will just tell you that, when we went public, we first got a binding protocol agreement with the FDA. Very, very rare. Anyone ever hear of a binding protocol agreement? Okay, it's very rare to get. We invested a year to get it. I didn't take a salary during that time. The two people I paid during my first year at the company was the regulatory lawyer to help us do that, and a reimbursement consultant to make sure we knew we were doing reimbursement. Two most important things, I think. All these milestones you can read, we were doing well. Even through the downturn in the market, we came right back. We were a $300 million company, no revenue, single product, one company. Single product public company. Now, as per Reg FD, if you know the SEC rules, anything that's material to an investor has to be disclosed. What isn't material in a single product company? Everything's material. So our saga played out in front of the world, and we often were on the front pages of Wall Street Journal, Fortune, and other magazines. So, and here are our fortunes. So here we were expecting a panel date. We had a tremendous interaction with the agency where they not only told us that we'd be going to a panel meeting in the next quarter. I asked them, I said, is there any way, I see you have a panel scheduled for tanning booths. It's the right group to talk about this. It's a melanoma detection device on March 25th, so I suppose you'll have us March 26th. My branch chief, whom I have great respect for and like very, very much, said to me, no comment, so that meant he confirmed that was the case. And I said, look, I'll tell you what I'm worried about. If everything goes well, I don't want to be presumptuous, if everything goes well, will you have enough time to approve it by May 5th? And he said to me, Joe, I've heard Thanksgiving, I've heard Christmas, I've heard New Year's, I've never heard May 5th. Why do you need this approved by May 5th? I said, because that's Melanoma Monday. That's when the American Academy of Dermatology publicizes the heck out of skin cancer. He said to me, Joe, the FDA PR office would love to do a joint announcement with you on that Melanoma Monday. So I'll tell you what, we'll get all the paperwork done before the panel. If it needs to be tweaked, yeah, we could get it done in whatever weeks that would be, like 9 weeks. I thought I was dreaming. So I said, what do you mean by the paperwork? And he got me on. He goes, the labeling. So I didn't disclose that because I didn't have it in writing. Thank God I didn't disclose that. So here I am waiting for a panel date. Instead of a panel date, I got a not approvable letter. And it was a shock. And the company really never recovered from that. So we filed a supervisory review, and we got called and said, let's make a deal. And the deal is if you retract the supervisory review, we'll give you a panel date. One of the elements of our supervisory review is you broke the law. You got to give a first product a panel. So they said, tell you what we'll do. We'll give you a panel if you retract the supervisory review. And I said, thank you. I appreciate that. If you retract a non-approvable letter, you got a deal. Done. Never retracted the non-approvable letter. So we went into a panel meeting with a non-approvable letter extant. I don't think that's ever happened before or since. And we won at panel. Now, you'll have to read that. It is a section here called The Greatest 15 Minutes of My Life. It happened at the panel. It was just ridiculous and the whole bit. But we won at the panel, which I think is huge. Again, if you're going to take on the FDA, if we lost at panel, I don't think we'd have a leg to stand on. So we won at the panel meeting, And then the people, a part of the review team that loved the product, and they loved it. We went back and forth and fought a little bit, but that we had a good relationship, came up to me after the panel meeting. They were embarrassed, and they said to me with smiles on their face, "We look forward to working with you." This was great, but they never responded to my letters and things, and now the clock's ticking. So I assumed that a denial letter was being written, notwithstanding we were approved at panel. So I filed an NDA amendment to modify the claim based on, normally, you do the horse trading at the end, but I wanted to push a pause on the clock, so I filed an amendment. Still not word. Filed another amendment on commitment to a training program. Again, just trying to stall a little bit. And our team, if anyone watches Scandal, we put a team together that Olivia Pope couldn't have put together. And so these weren't my ideas. And so we filed a citizen petition in the middle of the review because there was no mechanism. There was no other mechanism for appeal, right? J&J could say, just damn it, give me the decline, refuse. I'm sorry, the rejection letter, and then we'll come with an appeal. I couldn't do that as a single product one company. So we filed a citizen petition. Now, all through this stuff, all those machinations, I'm losing investors. I'm losing the real blue chip fundamental investors. Every time your valuation goes down a little bit when you're in this level, you fall out of the range of the indices, the index funds that have to hold you. When you're above 300, all these funds that have to grab a certain percent of every company in the index. When you're at 250, so there's cut points like 250, 200, 150. And as we're coming down, as one fund's leaving, others are leaving. It's horrible. And you couldn't control it, even though we were having some good things. When we got to the end of the road and we did get it approved, we were left with very few shares authorized, and we were in the hands of the deal players. A deal player is a fund that'll give you money at a discount to market and take warrants. They'll sell the stock immediately within a week or two. So they'll make a nice spread, and then they have the upside on the warrants, okay? So you're in the hands of the deal players and the shorts. We were incredibly attacked in the shorts, and we launched the product not with as much money as we would need to do it, and we needed more money during the missionary phase of the work. What I loved was I got 62 letters from doctors saying that they wouldn't have detected the melanomas they had. Actually, not 62 things we heard of. Sometimes at scientific meetings, the doc would come up to us and say, if I didn't have that MelaFind, I would have missed this melanoma. So there were 62 melanomas I was aware of in the first year that that wouldn't have been caught without us, and it felt great. But by that point, you'll read the book, I needed to worry about Joseph Gulfo, and I needed to leave the company. And I did. All right. So as you know, raising money in medical device companies, even if you're public, is very difficult. If this were a biotech company in one financing, I would have raised $120 million. No, I did 160 and 11. And the way you do that in 9 years, the way you do that, any of you out there, you have to stay close to your investors. And I remember one investor saying to me, Joe, what I love about you is even when you had bad news, you came and visited me. I think that's very important for all of you. Stay close to your investors. It might be painful at times, but it really pays out. So the way we were able to challenge the FDA and win was on a couple of things. The first was we had a binding protocol agreement, which in writing said this is what defines safety and effectiveness, which was sensitivity and specificity. There's an out clause in binding protocol agreements that if there's a new scientific issue, the FDA can back out of it, but they're supposed to have a meeting with you. They never did. So one of the big parts of all the things that we did in the challenge is we cited the fact that they broke the binding protocol agreement, and the FDA instructed the panel to ignore the binding protocol agreement. Yes, we had it all in writing. Thank you for, literally. The other ace in the hole we had was as we arrived for the panel meeting, I remember actually it's on the train ride down from New York to DC, I cried the whole train ride, okay? Because the person had a clinical on me, she would turn the page as we'd look at FDA slides, And every so often I'd go, I'd have like even like a more intense cry than what I was on. She turned to me like, what are they doing? And one of the things they did was they redefined safety and effectiveness. Okay? Safety in the regs is this. They changed it to the definition of effectiveness, and they developed a new definition of effectiveness to include lesions in the study that the machine rejected. They tried to concoct that that was intent to treat. Meanwhile, if the machine wouldn't read on it, how could it be? So one of our experts at panel, one of the biggest name in melanoma, got up to the panel. He said a story. He says, I have friends who deal with breast cancer. They're radiologists. Not one of them ever told me that when a mammogram is unreadable, do they call a patient and say, great news. The mammogram's not readable. No, they call them and say, sorry, you got to come in for an MRI because, the density, right? So his point was, but you get the point. So because of these two facts, we really rode them hard, and we got covered by a lot of media. We got great hearings by people inside the Beltway, not just elected officials, but think tanks and others, and we won. But in the end, when you're a little company, I think the FDA always wins, and that certainly happened to Mela. Okay, so I believe in my heart FDA must be challenged for many reasons, but on this I'm saying, of course, when appropriate, right? Because it operates in a highly political environment. It's not just about the data. It's not just about your product, it's the product before you. With Sarepta, it's not just about their drug, it's about ADA. FDA already caved into the women's rights groups on approving the Viagra for women. Do they want to be seen to be caving in two in a row, cave into the DMD group? So it's not just about what you're doing. It's about a broader thing. I had to do intensive inside the Beltway activities, is a word I'm refusing to use, twice. My last 2 drug approvals, okay? I had to do that, and we hit every endpoint. So I do believe that there's a tremendous political component, and the FDA, because of fear, which we'll get into, because of fear, and it's really not their fault, but it has to be fixed, have strayed into areas that they don't have a mandate to be in. Okay, so what is their mandate? If you open up the regs, this is FDA's mandate. Okay, well, let's just say here. It's to promote health, okay? So why don't you all read that? Promote health, and this is how we're gonna promote health. Now notice here, for devices especially, right? Reasonable assurance, okay? All right. Now, if you go on the FDA website at the time, they since changed it. Andy von Eschenbach, former FDA commissioner, and I have been really saying a lot about this mission stuff. They've now changed it to their mission is to promote and protect, but at the time, they changed their mission to protect. Okay? And that's not what Congress told them to do. And you just read, and down here, they gave themselves, so go back up here, promote health, and there's 3 words on urgency. Not only promote it in a prompt, timely, and efficient manner. Damn it, Congress wanted new stuff and they wanted it fast. That's what that says. But FDA said, no, we're gonna promote it, and we're looking for comparative effectiveness. We're even looking for better prices. That's not their mandate. So the FDA is clearly strayed, and very few people talk about this. It's very problematic. Okay, so every now and then you will find an article written that really represents the truth. There's so much written by various outlets. There's outlets that I just wouldn't talk to anymore because it was obvious that they had a point of view that really lays it out. So this is from Fierce Biotech. And it talks about how, it says here that the FDA likes to say that devices are approved as fast or just slightly slower than in Europe, and they pointed to this product, right, the valve replacement. And truth be told, that was the second generation. The first generation was on the market in Europe 4 years before approved in the US. Okay, and this is from Fierce Biotech, not from me. And this, I'm sorry, Fierce Devices, sorry. And this is one heck of a product. I mean, look at these recent data on patients of intermediate risk. It's really, really a great, great product. And U.S. patients were denied that, right? The other thing I'd like to say is this is the medical marketplace at work. After the product was approved, it was really, really well defined who it's optimal for. It's optimal for intermediate risk, not the high risk. Okay? This is the way the system was designed to work. What about the Watchman device? 10 years. 10 years. And what really annoys me about the Watchman device, I know we have a couple of docs in the room. The last time I saw a patient, we were still calling it PT-PTT, okay? So, but it's INRs now, I know. But it was horrible to try to get a patient on warfarin to have appropriate anticoagulation. You just simply couldn't do it. So all the drugs you see, and now this device where they compare to warfarin, and there's not, the p-values are just off. The fallacy of that is, on a clinical study, yes, patients take their warfarin. The nurses call them. If the PT-PTT is out of whack because they're coming in monthly, not every 3 months in clinical practice, they get retweaked, right? So on clinical trials, the results of warfarin are much, much better than they are in clinical practice. So the Watchman had to be approved for those who couldn't take warfarin. And I think that's not right. I think it's a great device, and it got limited and for 10 years. Okay. So this came up yesterday. So what does all this stuff that we just talked about do? What it does is it constricts funding to devices. And look what's eating devices lunch now. Now we have LFIT coming in a big way. And apps and things like that, things that don't need FDA approval. And Sergey Brin is the one who really said it best. He said, I'll never get involved in anything that requires FDA approval. But that's not good for us, right? Because, I don't want to preempt myself, something next message on a slide or two for now. But this is what's happening. And so, gosh darn it, we better speak up. We better challenge, and it better not just be when there's a drug that hit, a device that hit every endpoint and the whole bit. It's got to be a more global, macro, ideological challenge, I believe. So, this is in the news. This is good. This helps our sector when you have acquisitions and things. But what I really liked about this article was 40% of adults in the country will have some form of heart disease by 2030. We need more devices, and we don't just need them for the ultra acute end, right? We need it for that as well. Okay, so what goes on in Washington? Again, why we have to challenge is not helpful. So here you have 21st century cures. People following that? Are you reading it? Okay, I read the whole bill. It took a lot. But here is a proposal for breakthrough therapy of devices. And you could read the 4 criteria. Okay. Well, guess what? The same criteria from 2008. We already have provisions for this. They're in the regs. So why do we need all this sturm and drang over breakthrough devices? I got expedited review from MelaFind. Back then, there were 6 ways you can get expedited review. We satisfied 4 of the 6. So what's all this? It's a PR effort. It's the same thing going on in drugs and devices. Same exact thing. Where nothing part of the breakthrough therapy for drugs and devices wasn't already in the regs. In fact, if you lay out the 4 expedited programs, they all have the first same sentence. and the provisions are just cosmetically different. So the Senate Help Committee decided to move forward with some of the 21st century cures provisions. And the first one, I want to see some more jaws drop. Can you imagine that Congress need to put in a law to retrain all FDA personnel on least burdensome approach? Least burdensome approach is 101. It's what you guys do every day. Why does that have to be in the law? It has to be in the law because FDA is not practicing it. Why are they not practicing it? Bad congressional oversight. That's why. So this dropped my jaw there. And now we have the breakthrough therapy stuff, which I just showed you is not necessary. So are these really needed? This isn't working. Okay, are these really needed? Okay, now, let's go to the other side. You have this. All this is going to do is give you more health IT and apps and all that kind of stuff, which I like, okay? I don't want it making diagnoses, but I like, that's okay. And I think this is fine. I mean, I think we need a lot more on combination products, but that's good. But what are we going to have now? Between breakthrough therapy and this kind of stuff, what's happening? We're seeing investment in HIT and apps go way up. With the breakthrough therapy, same thing device is going to happen from drugs. I was at a conference. I teach cancer biology, so I go to all the cancer companies I can see. So at one conference I was at, there were 100 cancer companies presenting. I couldn't see 100. I think I saw 45 of them. You know how many diabetes companies they were presenting? These are small companies. 3. Obesity companies? 5. Why? Because the easy pathway on drugs and biologics is for these ultra niche cancer claims that then you throw in a mutation or two and you could keep carving. Okay? That's what's going to happen with devices. So what's going to happen? Most of the stuff we consider medical devices is getting left out. It's not covered. And I think this is a huge problem. And back to the theme of the talk. Do we need to challenge? Yeah, we got to challenge. And as I said, the trade groups, I remember when I was going through with MelaFind, I remember when I wrote the book, I said to some of my DC insiders, you got to get me into CADVMed. You got to get me in. I said, Joseph, they don't want to see you. I mean, they don't want to see me. I wrote a book. He says, they like what you went through. They get to buy you a song for going through that. So it's very disheartening. So what happens? So we move to products that don't require challenge, and those are very incremental, and then we run into the risk that reimbursers won't pay for them because they're so incremental. So we're not getting innovation, and all your efforts you're not getting paid for, right? Or we do the ultra breakthroughs. Let me tell you what happened with drugs and biologics. In 2014, breakthrough therapy I think came out in 12. 40% of all new drugs and biologics for orphans were for little niche diseases. In 2015, 48%. What do you think is going to happen next year? Even more. You have major companies, it's projected, major companies like Bristol Myers are going to be the leaders in specialty drugs. No one's doing anything about heart failure and diabetes. Same thing's going to happen to medical devices. So what do? Speak out. I'm speaking out. I write these medical innovation impact index alerts where I bring up stuff like we're talking about. Vincent DeVita's speaking up. He's a very well-known oncologist, and he makes a great point. The incrementalism of just attacking one mutation at a time or using one drug when something else fails. We know to get cancer you need 8 mutations. Okay? Your body has to accumulate, actually there's 8 pathways that have to be affected. It could be done by 4 or 5 mutations. But the point is, why aren't we treating cancers with 4 or 5 agents? That would be innovation. We're not, because that's not, the regulatory system's not geared up for it. We can mobilize, patient groups are magnificent. Patient groups are really great. They need a little direction, but they're excellent. And the philosophy has to change. I'm coming out with another paper with the think tank in DC that's going to offer definitions of effectiveness. And we're going to get into that in a little while. Proper congressional oversight. Instead of fire alarm oversight, which I'll get to in a second, we need police patrol oversight. And I'm coming out with another proposal for shadow panel meetings. What I thought was really interesting with Sarepta, 36 experts in Duchenne muscular dystrophy wrote a letter to the FDA in advance of the panel meeting in support of this drug. And at the panel voted 7-3 against it. There's clearly something wrong with the panel system. I mean, Sarepta's too small a company to be able to have paid off 30, that's what we're all accused of, right? We're all accused of paying off, right? They're too small a company to be able to pay off 36 of the top DMD doctors. Okay. So again, the FDA has changed its mission to protect health, and again, I'm going to defend the agency out of fear. Out of fear. We have to fix that. But let's go back to what Thomas Aquinas said of us. You know, if that's the highest priority, then what are we even doing? Right? What are we even doing? So this is really interesting to me. A company, Epigenomics, has a blood test for colon cancer, right? So everyone should have a colonoscopy. In fact, mine do, because I have polyps. I got to go every 2 years. But everyone over the age of 50 should have a colonoscopy. But a lot of people don't do it. So you have the stool test by Exact Sciences, and this group came out with a blood test. And basically what they're saying is, for people who don't get a colonoscopy, let's at least do something. So they did a great trial. They compared the performance, sensitivity, and specificity of their their diagnostic in patients going to colonoscopy. So you could define the sensitivity and specificity. FDA agrees with them. They go through the whole thing, big trial, great results. And the FDA says to them, well, you know, we really don't like the results because we want to see whether your product increases utilization of colonoscopy. What are we talking about? What are you talking about? See, the FDA has replaced, I'm going to show you a nice slide later, they've replaced effectiveness with clinical utility. So the company asked the FDA, well, they went back and forth at the agency. Finally, they filed a supervisory review, and they won. So the PM, you could read here, rejected finally, and they won. And the FDA didn't know what feedback to give it, so they just decided, let's just review what we have, supervisory review, and put it in. So again, I wrote this paper called The Proper Role of the FDA in the 21st Century, and it got picked up by the Boston Business Journal, and when I first saw the title, I shook a little bit because I didn't know where he was going with it, you know, because I am Italian, Scalia's Italian. He's assuming that I subscribe to every thought, which is okay, I do like Scalia, but I didn't know where this is going. But I love where it went as an originalist. I am an originalist. We have to get back to the letter and the spirit of the laws, the original law, okay? So yeah, the FDA has now ordained themselves as the arbiters of clinical utility, and that is not in the law. So this is the paper. I'd love all of you to read it. Joe, I'll give you a link for it, okay? And I have a follow-up paper coming out. This paper sets the problem up, which I'm going to go through right now, and we have the follow-up paper, what the solution is, which I'll give you a graphic from that one. So in a nutshell, the FDA, in my view, our view, is straying from its public health mission, which is good, safety and effectiveness, based on average patient trials, okay? That's fine. Into the private health decision-making between a doctor and a patient. And this private health decision-making is where personalized medicine happens, based on safety and effectiveness of our drugs and devices, whether or not they should be used in a particular patient. So the FDA is definitely encroaching on private health decisions. And basically, this is how it's done. In the good old days, not too long ago, safety and effectiveness, this is what safety and effectiveness meant. And because of fear, we have new definitions basically of safety and effectiveness. No more. Safety and effectiveness now is safety determined by benefit risk, not by considering the true safety of the product. Benefit risk is in the guidelines, but in the law, but it was not used to the extent of here, where you're not even basically looking at whether a drug is safe for use by the conditions prescribed. And then effectiveness is clinical utility. Clinical utility, patient outcomes, both of these have to be proven in large-scale trials, both for devices and drugs and biologics, okay? And that's wrong. So what we contend in this paper is that FDA's role in the medical marketplace is to put new products on the top of the funnel based on safety and effectiveness. Then you have early adopters, patients, drug companies and device companies want to differentiate their product from others on the market, doing larger studies once they've gotten through the hurdle. Payers now saying, well, I'm not paying for that. Show me there's a difference. Okay, we run a pilot with a payer, right? All these things then take this big of what we have, all the approved products, and we whittle them down to the ones used the most, the ones that are most useful. And what we contend in the paper is The FDA has moved itself by moving to clinical outcomes and things. They've basically moved themselves to wanting to be here. They want on approval, to be able to say to doctors to dictate medicine. Use it this way. This is the appropriate. Basically, they want to be able to approve with guidelines. This is when to use this. This is how to use it. And that's not the system, because often, as you all know, it takes years for a new product, drug, biologic device to settle into usage, to settle into the marketplace, where they actually learn who it's best to be used for. So if FDA is moving here, and they are, that's why the pre-approval requirements are just off the charts. Okay? And what drives this all is what I call the vicious cycle of oversight. And what typically happens is some catastrophe happens on the outside. There's either some macro event like Ebola or something else, or more importantly, when a drug or a device, right, the morcellators, the meshes, and various drugs cause problems. What does the FDA do? What happens? Congress calls in the FDA and beats the living daylights out of them. Just beats them up. I just testified at a Senate hearing. I made the point, even with Avandia, a great drug, FDA did the right thing with Avandia, and they still got beat up for it. Okay, so even sometimes when they do the right thing, they beat it for it. So the FDA goes down to the hill, gets their heads handed to them. They go back home, and what do? They recoil. Like, we're not going to let that happen again. And how do they recoil? You're all nodding your head, so I don't have to beat this to a dead horse. And then what happens? And then now congressional oversight, the police patrol oversight fails. The police patrol oversight is what keeps an eye on, are they practicing least burdensome approach? So that fails, and then what happens? The next time law gets written, and we're writing law every 5 years now with PDUFA and MDUFA, the next time law gets written, the recoiling gets incorporated into the law. And this is what we have. And no one's talking about this. I find it very upsetting. And what do we get? We get mounting regulations. And what does that do? Mounting regulations, and this is really, really germane more to devices than drugs. There's in the law, it even states that if you can do it aftermarket, do it aftermarket. It's basically, it almost says it that blatantly. Drugs too, there's a balance of pre-approval requirements and post-approval. But what all that I just talked about has done is this. We're now pre-approval requirements much more than post-approval, but post-approval big as well, and just mounting. And this is why drugs take longer to be approved, and the costs are going higher and higher. And I'm sorry, your name, you made a great point this morning when we were having breakfast, and then we're not even capturing things people aren't even developing because of this. So all this innovation is not happening, and we don't know how to capture that. So some people are doing things about it. The Right to Try movement, Right to Try says, if you're dying, gosh darn it, let people have access to drugs that have at least gotten through phase 1. Zeke Emanuel doesn't like that. Well, I don't know why. I don't know why anyone doesn't like that. I know why the drug companies don't like it, because if they do have a heart and they do let someone use it who's on death's door, we have a technical medical name for patients like this, train wrecks, okay? And you give an experimental drug to a train wreck patient. If they weren't in renal failure, they're going to be soon. If they're, you get the whole point. And so those get captured as adverse events for the drug, and even sometimes gets the company put on clinical hold. So the companies don't want Right to Try either. That has to be fixed, and I'll be down in DC next week at a briefing on Right to Try. This is really interesting. So this is back to the DMD. So NICE, everyone knows about NICE in the UK, right? NICE basically, doesn't want to pay for stuff, right? NICE is paying for a DMD drug that got approved on a conditional basis, okay? PTC Therapeutics drug. This drug, FDA refused to file, didn't even take it to a panel. Yet it's approved in Europe, and NICE is even paying for it. And at the Sarepta panel meeting last week, they did a study. They didn't do a randomized study, but they compared to another group of boys in Italy and Belgium versus boys on a trial. 4-year study doing biopsies, so you're doing a randomized. The kids on the trial, after 4 years, walked on average 2 football fields longer in 6 minutes than the other kids. Panel members, read the red, saying this stuff, yet they still voted against it. The 36 experts wrote a letter to get it approved. And so I'm done. My solution is we need to define for FDA what effectiveness is. This I worked out for drugs and biologics. I'm working on one for devices. If anybody has ideas, I'd love to hear them. But I think we have to define, we need a law to define what safety and effectiveness is. And fine, if you sponsor want to spend the money and go get a claim in clinical outcomes, go for it. That label will be coded green. And if you just do one for clinical signs and symptoms, that label will be coded that. So that is a solution. I'll be in the second paper that I've written. And I've written a second book that has nothing to do with any of this. Not quite. It does have a lot to do. I've always managed small med tech, biotech companies, and the publisher of this book called me and he said, boy, you have a lot of management lessons in here. Why don't you write a book on pulling that out for little companies and put it in and write another book, which I really went to town on the difficulties and challenges in managing little companies. That'll be out in September. And if you want, Joe, I'll come back next year, even on my birthday, and I'll talk about that. But thank you very much. Okay.
What can the people in this room, first of all, did he make a very compelling argument here? What can the people in this room do to help this originalist on his crusade?
I'd love ideas. I want to write, I came up with the framework for the drugs and biologics on the various categories of approval, categories of substantiating effectiveness. I'd love, if anyone has ideas, I'd love to hear what you think they would be. I think we got to separate devices and diagnostics. One of the things that really bothers me about diagnostics, they did it with epigenomics, they're doing it with some others, that just because you can measure something, prove to me prove the clinical utility of that measurement. I think that's bizarre. I don't mind it if a company wants to do that, but if you just want to measure what the parameter is, I think you should have a basis of approval. So input on what the different levels of effectiveness for devices should be, I could really use. Sorry.
What is the best way to give you that input?
My email.
Okay.
I'll leave some cards around.
Yeah, hi, Mark Fine from Autonexus. Quick question about panels. You know, it seems like this vague, anonymous beast, but does it come down to individuals?
The panel?
Yeah, the person, the human being on the panel who's got it in for you or has their own agenda?
Listen, I've run 3 panels in little companies where I was the main presenter, and I had a panel where at halftime the FDA came up to me, reviewer, and said, Joe, I got 3 things for you. Number 1, that was a phenomenal presentation. We'd like every company to present the way you did. Number 2, you're an honest guy. You presented your bad equally to your good. Number 3, you got it in the bag. We came back in the afternoon. One panelist slapped the table and said, I don't care how good the data are. Complete response is the completely wrong endpoint for this disease. 11-0 unanimous no. One panel member, and he told me later, the guy I published with in the past, he told me later, I was just trying to make a point about X, Y, Z. And I said, and you took my panel, you used my panel to make a point? And so you have that. You have panel members who love being panel members, so they want to fall in line with what the FDA wants. You have others just wanting to be quoted. It's a bad system. It's a really bad system.
In his talk, Joe mentioned that he's done this before, before MelaSciences.
Yeah, I didn't need this one. I already had my painful period.
They just try to get in, and anyhow.
Yeah.
And you were actually kind of brought in as a ringer. Like, if there's a guy who can get this through,
Right.
This is the guy. So for those who aren't as skilled as you are, to have this kind of challenge is beyond daunting.
And I hate to say this because I don't want it to sound, but that's why I wrote the book. The message of the book is, if innovation is this difficult, that I had to go through what I went through, to get this product approved, we're not going to have innovation. If we continue to make it be this difficult, we're not going to have real innovation. And that's really the message of the book.
So given the events that transpired, and I'm sure you've had plenty of time to ruminate on this, knowing what you know now, is there something along the way that might have changed the outcome? Had you this, had you not that, given the personalities, given...
You know, I really think we got caught up in a macro event at FDA. The FDA just got a new head of devices who wanted to come out with a whole, all of us were in the same boat at the same time, right? Where they wanted to come out with new guidances in devices. I know a VC who told me, I went down and I got on my hands and knees and I said to them, we don't care where you set the hurdle, don't care, but just don't tell us you're going to be changing things. We don't know what to do with that. We don't know how to structure our investments. And they didn't care. So I think that we really were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I know that's a little bit of a cop-out, but I honestly don't know what I would do differently with the FDA. I know what I'd do differently in the company. You read the book. I should have done a little more diligence on X, Y, or Z, and I should have done better market research. You know, it's very hard. One of the very provocative things, I think, is how do you do real market research with the end user when you don't have your final product yet? And I think that's really where we fail. I'll explain. The experts advising us told us, we don't need help with freckles. We don't need help with these kind of things. We need help with the atypical pigmented skin lesions. Put it on the market, guess what the docs were doing? They were putting on freckles. We didn't train it for freckles. So how could I, to me, that's the biggest mistake I made. How could I have gotten that input before I had a working prototype? How do you do that? Market research with the end users, not from the experts, is really, really key. So I've made mistakes, but I can't say on the regulatory side.
Dr. Joseph Gulfo will be speaking at 10X in 2017. Let's hear it for him.
Very sweet. Thank you very much.